Well, the Middle East is imploding, seemingly, and we at the West are questioning our collective conscience on a daily basis as to whether or not we get involved, and where, and to what extent. Last week it was Egypt, this week Syria. Talk about our past coming back to haunt us. Like so much of the Middle, or as it used to be termed in the French-style Near East, Syria was a country designed and delineated by well-meaning government functionaries and then handed over to the toughest, most powerful clan leader to run as his personal fiefdom and then to pass on to his sons. These appointed rulers, then as now, were infamous for their cruelty to any who crossed them, be they friend or foe. The forms of torture they used and their appetite for revenge more than matched the bloodthirsty monarchs who'd ruled absolutely in Europe for centuries. However, in Europe, society had evolved by way of the gradual and painful rise of popular democracy, whereas in the Middle East, feudal power continued to hold sway and continued to do so in those countries we'd created. And whilst control often passed out of the hands of the original appointees by way of treachery and civil strife, the running of those countries always ended up in the hands of the strongest, most powerful and ruthless tribal chiefs. But interestingly, while not moving with the times in terms of improving the lot of their subjects, the strongmen and their descendants never failed to keep abreast of developments in weaponry and general military paraphernalia. If there was a new way to wreak havoc amongst their enemies, they were always ready to buy it. Be it long-barreled muskets, martini rifles, AK-47s, chieftain tanks, sarin gas or napalm. Cash on the barrelhead and no questions asked. And so now, almost 100 years since Syria was first cobbled together, the 21st century counterparts of those well-intentioned government functionaries who put it together in the first place are now desperately trying to sort out the mess that's been created. Should we really be so surprised when confronted by the horrific scenes on our television screens? I mean, we've had our wars over religion and the will of the people, and we've shaken off the divinely appointed rulers who held for centuries the power of life and death over our ancestors. Do we really think that Henry VIII wouldn't have signed up for the odd consignment of nerve gas if he thought his rule depended on it? I don't. To me, the people of Britain have made a truly wise decision. And it's a decision we have made because thanks to social media, parliamentarians are now more and more in touch with us and they voted the way they knew we wanted them to. But now, sadly, we have to pay the price for getting our way. We have to stand on the sidelines and watch all the horror unravel until the tyrants and the despots are finally overcome by the ordinary people, just as our antecedents did for us. We can aid the victims, but we can't get involved militarily. So call me on 0845 6060 973 and join me on the soapbox. Have we made the right decision? Do we need to be so closely allied to America? Are we being urged to get involved with a situation we should keep out of? 0845 6060 973 is the number to call. Or you can text 84850, or you can tweet at LBC 973 or email larry@lbc.co.uk. And have your say on the Syrian crisis. I'm joined now, I'm absolutely delighted to say, by Nabila Ramdani, a journalist and a widely respected commentator on Middle East opinions and Middle East goings-on. Good morning to you, Nabila.
Good morning, Larry.
How are you today?
I'm very well indeed. Thank you so much for having me on.
Hey, not at all. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, and indeed, I have to say, it's an honour. I read your article this morning in the Observer in the very early hours of the morning, and I'm just like, can you answer me one question and then just go, why this rush to war on the part of all the governments outside of Damascus? Why are we being pushed towards this getting involved?
Well, I think it's for several reasons. Maybe it's a mix of, not having the full picture of what's actually happening on the ground, and perhaps a lack of understanding, deep understanding of the history of the region and the intricacies and the implications of military intervention. And perhaps the idea that has been, the knee-jerk reaction of Western governments over a recent conflict, this idea that, military action is the only answer and it can solve everything, and, a short, sharp shock reaction to any problem around the world, especially former colonial countries of colonial former colonies that can sort out the problem. But I don't think it's right.
No, it's not. And in theory, it's all very well to talk about short, sharp shocks, but these short, sharp shocks have a way of reverberating and bouncing right back in the face of the people who have actually administered them.
Yes, indeed, and you were quite right in your introduction, very eloquent introduction, to remind us of the history of Syria, which of course used to be part of the Ottoman Empire, and after the First World War, effectively was created as this artificial country, literally a line in the sand, and was a French colony until 1946. And the legacy, as you quite rightly pointed out, the legacy of, the strong man in several countries in the region, including Syria, that colonial powers effectively put a strong man belonging to an ethnic minority at the top of the country to hold down the different ethnic groups that made up Syrian society, including Christians, the Druze, Muslims. But the legacy is very much one of ruthless military rule, so as to hold down the whole country. And of course, during the Cold War, Syria backed the Soviet Union, and the legacy of the Cold War still remains to this day, with Russia remaining a very staunch ally of Syria. And what the Assad dynasty created is this illusion that it was a secular and to a certain extent, democratic state. But of course, this impression that they wanted to send to the whole world, and which the West very much bought, and they tried to rehabilitate Assad and indeed his British-born wife, was wrong. And I think Western countries should very much be more adamant about isolating unsavory characters like Assad and other dictators.
Yeah, and I mean the thing is, as you say, that what the system used to be, you put your strong man in, and you make it look to the outside world, particularly once we got well on into the 20th century. You made it look to the viewing public from the outside world that this was a regular guy, and he was doing it all in the name of democracy. I mean, essentially, it was the same thing with Saddam Hussein. He was, in theory, running a democratic country, was he not?
Yes, absolutely. And this idea that Arab secular countries and their leaders, in spite of the atrocities that were going on in the countries, where people we could do business with, is absolutely outrageous. And the same happened, over the recent history with somebody like Colonel Gaddafi, for example. We, especially Tony Blair, rehabilitated him spectacularly as a reliable trade partner in between attempts to kill them, by the Americans specifically. But I think that was the wrong approach to foreign policy, and this legacy makes it extremely difficult to take action wherever action is needed. Of course, the systematic murder of a civilian population needs a strong response from the international community. But what complicates everything even more is the legacy of Western countries in the Arab world, the muddling and meddling and the hypocrisy with Western countries not having this moral authority by resorting to the most abject weapons themselves in parts of the Arab world, including, for example, the American armed forces using chemical weapons in Iraq, for example, in Fallujah in 2004, or the American administration helping Saddam Hussein in the 1980s, exterminating the Iranians using chemical weapons, or more recently, the U.S. Sponsored or sourced white phosphorus chemical weapons, provided to the Israeli government to repress Palestinians in Gaza during the 2008 conflict. So this legacy, makes Western authority just as suspect as Arab despots, I'm afraid.
I just had a quick chat with Petri Hoskin, who follows me on, one of our lady presenters, and as far as she's concerned, she and I completely agree. It's such a pity that the girls don't take the whole thing over, because you're never going to see 10,000 women facing another 10,000 women with Kalashnikovs in their arms, and without one of them's going to say, why don't we just sit down and have a cup of tea and sort this out? But you leave it to the boys and it just finishes up in a disaster like this.
It does indeed, and I think what has been overlooked so far is the diplomatic and indeed more specifically the legal route. There has been no attempt 2.5 years on since the beginning of the Arab Spring, but of the Assad literally killing civilian populations indiscriminately, no attempt whatsoever to formally criminalize the regime and turning the members of the regime into international pariahs and take them to turn them into war criminals and issue, proceedings that would, summon them to the International Criminal Court or set up extraordinary war tribunals, for example. Treat them like criminals, right? Treat them like criminals. Nabila, thank you so much for joining me on London's Biggest Conversation this morning. That was Middle East expert Nabila Ramdani with an extraordinary insight into the region. But now it's the chance for you to have your say. Should the West be